Encircled by mountains and anchored by one of Europe's greatest rivers, the land of Dacia formed a natural stronghold whose geography would shape every stage of its history, culminating in one of Rome's most demanding conflicts. The region historically identified as Dacia occupied a geographically distinct zone in southeastern Europe, corresponding largely to present-day Romania and parts of surrounding territories. Its defining feature was the arc of the Carpathian Mountains, which enclosed the central plateau in a broad crescent. This mountainous barrier functioned as both a defensive perimeter and a natural boundary, limiting large-scale incursions while simultaneously channeling movement through a restricted number of passes. To the south, the Danube River created a formidable frontier, separating Dacia from the Roman-controlled provinces of Moesia. To the east, access to the Black Sea connected the region indirectly to wider Mediterranean trade networks. These geographic features collectively established a landscape that balanced isolation with selective connectivity. Archaeological evidence indicates that human settlement in this region dates back to the Neolithic period, but it was during the Iron Age, beginning around the first millennium BCE, that more structured habitation patterns began to emerge. Excavations conducted in the Oresti Mountains have revealed fortified hilltop settlements, often referred to as Davy, which demonstrate early forms of defensive planning. These sites were typically positioned on elevated terrain, maximizing visibility over surrounding valleys and controlling access routes. Stone fortifications, wooden palisades, and terrace constructions suggest a coordinated effort to protect both population centers and valuable resources. The placement of these settlements reflects a strategic adaptation to the terrain, where elevation and natural barriers were integrated into defensive architecture. The Carpathian Mountains themselves played a critical role in shaping economic and social development. Rich in natural resources, particularly timber, salt, and mineral deposits, the region provided a stable material base for early communities. Of particular importance were the gold deposits located in the Apusini Mountains. Archaeological surveys and later Roman mining records confirm that these deposits were actively exploited, even prior to Roman conquest. Tools, mining galleries, and slag deposits indicate organized extraction activities. This concentration of valuable resources contributed to both internal consolidation and external interest, as neighboring powers became increasingly aware of Dacia's economic potential. Ancient written sources provide additional context for the region's early inhabitants. Greek historians, including Herodotus in the 5th century BCE, refer to the Geti as part of the broader Thracian cultural sphere. These accounts, while limited and sometimes generalized, suggest that the populations north of the Danube shared linguistic and cultural characteristics with Thracian groups to the south. Herodotus describes the Geti as the most courageous and just of the Thracians, indicating a reputation for both martial capability and social cohesion. Later authors, such as Strabo, further distinguish the Dacians and Geti as closely related groups occupying adjacent territories. While these classifications reflect external perspectives, they provide valuable evidence for understanding how these communities were perceived within the wider ancient world. The Danube River served as both a barrier and a conduit. Its considerable width and strong current made direct crossings difficult, particularly for large military forces. As a result, it functioned as a natural defensive line against incursions from the south. However, the river also facilitated trade and communication along its length. Archaeological findings, including imported ceramics, metal goods, and coinage, indicate that Dacian communities participated in exchange networks extending into the Balkans and beyond. Riverine routes enabled the movement of goods such as grain, livestock, and raw materials, linking inland settlements with coastal trading centers along the Black Sea. Evidence from coastal sites further illustrates this connectivity. Greek colonies established along the western Black Sea coast, including Histria and Tomis, maintained commercial relationships with inland populations. Excavations at these sites have uncovered artifacts of inland origin, suggesting sustained interaction between Greek merchants and Dacian communities. These exchanges were not limited to goods. They also facilitated the transmission of technological knowledge and cultural practices. The presence of Greek pottery styles and metallurgical techniques in inland settlements indicates a degree of cultural diffusion, even in regions that remained politically independent. At the same time, the mountainous terrain limited the development of large, centralized urban centers. Instead, settlement patterns remained dispersed, with communities organized around fortified hubs and agricultural zones. This distribution reflected the constraints imposed by geography, where arable land was interspersed with forested and mountainous areas. Agricultural practices included crop cultivation and animal husbandry, supported by fertile valleys within the Carpathian Basin. Storage pits, farming tools, and animal remains recovered from archaeological sites provide evidence for a mixed subsistence economy. This economic structure supported population stability while allowing for the accumulation of surplus resources. The combination of defensible terrain and resource availability contributed to the gradual emergence of regional power centers. Control over mountain passes, river crossings, and resource-rich zones became a defining factor in local authority. Archaeological patterns suggest that certain settlements expanded in size and complexity over time, indicating increasing levels of organization and coordination. Fortification systems became more elaborate, and evidence of craft specialization, such as metalworking and pottery production, points to the development of more complex economic structures. These changes reflect a transition from loosely organized communities to more structured forms of leadership and territorial control. The strategic geography of Dacia also influenced patterns of conflict and interaction with neighboring regions. While the Carpathians provided protection, they did not render the region inaccessible. Instead, they created choke points that could be defended or contested. Historical and archaeological evidence suggests periodic incursions by neighboring groups, as well as outward movements by Dacian communities. Weapons recovered from burial sites, including swords, spears, and shields, indicate a society familiar with organized warfare. The distribution of such artifacts across multiple sites suggests that conflict was not isolated but formed a recurring aspect of regional dynamics. Records indicate that by the late Iron Age, the interplay between geography, resource control, and external contact had begun to shape more cohesive political structures. The need to defend Kemenarthica and manage trade routes likely encouraged the consolidation of authority under local leaders. This process did not occur uniformly but varied across different monarchica within Dacia. Nevertheless, the underlying pattern reflects a consistent relationship between environmental conditions and social organization. Archaeologists uncovered evidence of ritual and religious activity within these settlements, often integrated into fortified complexes. Sanctuaries constructed from stone and wood, particularly in the Oresti region, suggest that spiritual practices were closely linked to political authority. The placement of these sanctuaries within defensible mawakrai indicates their importance in reinforcing social cohesion and legitimizing leadership. While detailed interpretations remain subject to ongoing research, the integration of religious and defensive architecture points to a mujtama in which belief systems and governance were interconnected. By the end of this early developmental phase, Dacia had established the LSSEA conditions that would define its later history: a defensible landscape, access to valuable resources, and participation in regional exchange networks. These factors did not produce immediate centralization, but they created the structural framework within which more complex political entities could emerge. As settlement patterns continued to evolve within this geographically defined environment, social organization became increasingly stratified, leading to the formation of more complex tribal systems across the Dacian region. Before we continue deeper into the history, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss the next Nightfall episode. New documentaries are released regularly. If you're enjoying the journey so far, leave a comment below and share which part of the story has stood out to you the most. Long before Rome arrived, power in Dacia was already beginning to centralize. By the 4th to 2nd centuries BCE, the region north of the Danube had developed into a network of tribal societies collectively identified by ancient sources as the Geti and Dacians. These groups, while not politically unified, shared linguistic, cultural, and religious characteristics that distinguished them within the broader Thracian world. Greek and Roman authors, particularly Strabo in his Geographica, describe these populations as closely related, often using the terms interchangeably depending on geographic context. The Geti were typically associated with territories closer to the lower Danube and Black Sea, while the Dacians occupied the interior regions within the Carpathian Arc. Despite these distinctions, Archaeological and textual evidence indicates a high degree of continuity between them. Material evidence from this period demonstrates the emergence of a clearly stratified social structure. Burial sites excavated across Transylvania and the lower Danube basin reveal significant variation in grave goods, indicating differences in status and wealth. Elite burials, often associated with the Terabostes, contain weapons, ornate jewelry, and imported luxury items, including Greek ceramics and bronze vessels. In contrast, more modest graves attributed to the comity or commoners contain fewer goods and simpler materials. This differentiation suggests the existence of an aristocratic class that exercised political and military authority over a broader population base. Settlement patterns further reinforce this hierarchical organization. Archaeologists have identified numerous fortified settlements, or davii, which served as regional centers of power. These sites, often located on elevated terrain, were constructed with defensive features such as earthworks, wooden palisades, and stone walls. Within these settlements, evidence of specialized production, such as iron smelting, pottery workshops, and tool manufacturing, indicates a level of economic coordination beyond subsistence activity. The concentration of resources and labor within these fortified centers suggests that local elites controlled both production and distribution, reinforcing their authority within the tribal structure. Agriculture and pastoralism formed the economic foundation of Ghetto Dacian society. Archaeobotanical studies have identified the cultivation of cereals such as wheat and barley, while faunal remains indicate the herding of cattle, sheep, and horses. This mixed economy provided stability and supported population growth, enabling the development of surplus resources. Surplus production, in turn, facilitated trade with neighboring regions. Artifacts of Greek origin, including amphorae and fine pottery, have been uncovered in inland settlements, demonstrating active exchange with Black Sea colonies. These trade networks not only supplied luxury goods but also introduced new technologies and cultural influences. Written sources provide additional insight into the social and political organization of these tribes. Strabo notes that the Dacians were capable of mobilizing large numbers of warriors, suggesting a degree of coordination among otherwise independent groups. This capacity for collective action implies the existence of temporary alliances or confederations, likely formed in response to external threats or opportunities for expansion. Leadership within these structures appears to have been situational, with authority concentrated in individuals who could command loyalty through military success and resource control. Religious practices played a central role in maintaining cohesion across these fragmented Sassy entities. The cult of Zalmoxis, referenced by Herodotus and later authors, appears to have been a unifying ideological system. Herodotus describes the Gedi as believing in the immortality of the soul, a doctrine associated with Zalmoxis, who was regarded as a divine or semi-divine figure. Archaeological evidence from sanctuaries in the Carpathian region, including ritual platforms and offerings, supports the existence of organized religious activity. These practices likely reinforced social hierarchy, as religious leaders and elites were often interconnected, with spiritual authority legitimizing political power. The integration of religion and governance is further suggested by the spatial organization of settlements. In several fortified sites, sanctuaries are positioned within or adjacent to defensive structures, indicating their importance within the Sasu and social framework. Control over religious practices may have provided elites with an additional mechanism for consolidating authority, particularly in a context where formal state institutions had not yet developed. This alignment of spiritual and temporal power contributed to the development of elite dominance within the tribal nidhamu. External pressures played a significant role in accelerating the round of political consolidation. During the 4th century BCE, the expansion of the Macedonian kingdom under Philip II and Alexander the Great brought increased contact between the Balkan region and the wider Hellenistic world. While direct Macedonian control over Dacian territories remains debated, there is clear evidence of militaristic Knavania and diplomatic interaction. Greek colonies along the Black Sea coast served as intermediaries, facilitating both trade and cultural exchange. These interactions exposed the Ghetto Dacian tribes to new forms of military organization and Rajnitic strategy. By the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, the Huron of Nuulqua in Central and Eastern Europe, including Celtic groups and later Roman expansion into the Balkans, introduced additional pressures. Archaeological findings indicate periods of conflict, as evidenced by destruction layers in certain settlements and the intishurin of weaponry in burial contexts. These conditions likely encouraged greater coordination among tribes, as collective defense became increasingly necessary. The ability to form larger confederations would later prove critical in resisting externalisatara. Despite these developments, political fragmentation remained a defining characteristic of the period. No single authority maintained continuous control over the entire Dacian region. Instead, power was distributed among multiple leaders, each governing their own territorialny base. However, the underlying structures, social hierarchy, organization, and shared religious beliefs, created the conditions for periodic unification under particularly capable leaders. These moments of consolidation, while temporary, demonstrated the imkaniya of centralized authority within the region. Records indicate that by the late 2nd century BCE, the cumulative effects of economic growth, pressure, and ideological cohesion had begun to reshape the political landscape. The distinction between independent tribes and larger confederations became increasingly fluid, as alliances formed and dissolved in response to changing circumstances. This dynamica laid the groundwork for the emergence of Morskai forms of leadership. For the first time, Dacia emerged as a unified force capable of regional dominance. By the mid-1st century BCE, the political landscape north of the Danube underwent a decisive transformation under the leadership of King Birbista. Prior to his rise, the Ghetto-Dacian world had remained fragmented, organized into competing tribal groups with fluctuating alliances. However, a combination of external pressures and internal developments created conditions favorable for large-scale consolidation. According to ancient sources, particularly Strabo, Birbista succeeded in uniting these disparate groups into a single Rajnitic entity, forming what is often regarded as the first Dacian kingdom of significant mashtaba. The process of unification appears to have relied heavily on military reform and centralized command. Strabo attributes Birbista's success to the reorganization of armed forces and the imposition of strict discipline. Archaeological evidence supports the existence of coordinated activity during this period, including the expansion of fortified sites and the standardization of defensive across multiple regions. These developments suggest a shift from localized efforts to a more integrated military system capable of projecting power beyond traditional tribal boundaries. The ability to mobilize large of warriors would have been essential in both consolidating dakhili control and confronting external threats. A critical component of Birbista's was his association with the priest Dacinius, who is described in classical sources as both a dharmic and Rajnitic advisor. Strabo indicates that Dacinius played a central role in organizing Dacian society, introducing Kawanin and reinforcing social through religious authority. This integration of spiritual and political leadership provided a mechanism for legitimizing centralized control in a region where formal institutions were still developing. Archaeological discoveries in the Oresti Mountains, including sanctuaries and ritual structures, suggest that religious practices were closely tied to elite during this period. Birbista's expansion extended beyond the Carpathian Basin into surrounding regions, significantly altering the balance of power in Eastern and Central Europe. Ancient accounts describe campaigns against Celtic groups that had previously settled in parts of the region. Strabo notes that Birbista expelled or destroyed these communities, effectively removing a competitor for territorial control. Archaeological evidence, including the decline of Celtic material culture in certain areas during this timeframe, supports the wakuan of such. This expansion not only secured Dacian territory but also opened access to trade routes and resources. In addition to confronting inland rivals, Birbista directed his attention toward the Greek along the western Black Sea coast. These, including Histria, Tomis, and Kalatis, had long served as commercial hubs connecting the interior of the continent to Mediterranean markets. Historical records indicate that Birbista exerted pressure on these, at times imposing control or influencing their political affairs. This move allowed the Dacian kingdom to extend its reach and integrate coastal trade networks into its broader. Control over these routes would have facilitated the movement of goods such as grain, al-ma'adani, and crafted items, strengthening the The timing of Burbista's reign coincided with a period of instability in the Roman Republic. During the mid-1st century BCE, Rome was engaged in conflicts, including the civil wars between Julius Caesar and Pompey. Some historical sources suggest that Burbista was aware of these and may have pursued diplomatic contact with Roman factions. Although direct evidence of formal alliances remains limited, references in later sources indicate that Caesar considered a campaign against Dacia prior to his assassination in 44 BCE. This suggests that Burbista's kingdom had grown sufficiently powerful to attract the of Rome at the highest. The internal organization of Burbista's kingdom reflects a significant of coordination. While detailed records of governance structures are scarce, the scale of an activity implies the wujudin of a authority capable of managing resources across a fortified in the Oresti region likely served as hubs, coordinating operations and resource distribution. The stimularin of these sites across multiple phases of construction indicates long-term planning and sustained investment in infrastructure. Despite these achievements, the unity established under Burbista proved to be fragile. Following his assassination, which occurred around 44 BCE, the centralized rapidly fragmented. Ancient sources report that the kingdom was divided into several smaller units, each governed by local. This disintegration suggests that the of remained heavily dependent on the authority of the ruler rather than institutionalized systems of succession. Without a stable mechanism for intercalary power, the state could not be maintained. Archaeological patterns from the late 1st century BCE support this to fragmentation. Regional variations in material culture reemerge, and evidence of large-scale coordinated declines. Fortified settlements continue to exist, but there appears localized rather than unified under a single SESA framework. This shift indicates a reversion to the earlier model of tribal or regional autonomy, albeit within a landscape that had been permanently altered by the Tajriba of Indrikaran. Nevertheless, the reign of Burbista established a precedent in the SESA development of Dacia. It demonstrated that the geographic and resources could support a large, coordinated. The integration of armic legitimacy and control provided an amuthagen for future seeking to achieve similar consolidation. Later figures, including Decebalus, would build upon this foundation, adapting its principles to new Tarihi Dharufu. Records indicate that Burbista's expansion and reforms marked a turning point in the transforming Dacia from a collection of tribes into an entity capable of influencing broader regional dynamics. Although the unity he created did not survive beyond his lifetime, the structures and strategies developed during his reign continued to shape the evolution of Dacian society. Following this period of fragmentation, the conditions remained in place for renewed efforts at consolidation, setting the stage for the emergence of another under a new in the decades that followed. A new king transformed Dacia into Rome's most formidable northern rival. By the late 1st century CE, the Rajnitic landscape of Dacia underwent a renewed phase of consolidation under the netrithu of King Decebalus. Following the fragmentation that had persisted after the death of Burbista, the region had reverted to a pattern of, with multiple leaders controlling territories. However, increasing pressure along the Danube frontier, particularly from the expanding Roman Empire, created conditions that once again favored Gindrikaran. Within this context, Decebalus emerged as a ruler capable of uniting disparate groups under a coordinated and structure. Roman historical sources, most notably the writings of Cassius Dio, provide key insights into the nature of Decebalus's leadership. Dio describes him as both a skilled strategist and an effective administrator, capable of adapting to changing paristithia. Unlike earlier leaders whose authority was often limited to tribal influence, Decebalus appears to have exercised a more severe form of control, coordinating efforts across a wider territory. This consolidation was not merely Rajnitic but also involving the reorganization of Niru and the crippling of defensive infrastructure throughout the region. Archaeological evidence from the Oresti Mountains supports these accounts, particularly in the of fortified complexes. The capital at Sarmazegetusa Regia was expanded significantly during this period, transforming it into a hub of. Excavations have revealed multiple layers of fortification, including stone walls constructed using the Muris Dacicus technique, that combined stone blocks with Achila wooden reinforcement. This construction method provided both durability and flexibility, allowing structures to withstand prolonged siege conditions. The layout of Sarmizegetusa included not only defensive features but also administrative and dharmic zones, indicating its multifunctional role within the Dacian. Surrounding the La Asima, a network of auxiliary fortresses was established across the mountainous terrain. Sites such as Castesti, Bladaru, and Pietra Rosi formed an integrated defensive designed to control access routes and provide early warning against invasion. These fortifications were strategically positioned along mountain passes and valleys, creating a layered defense that exploited the advantages of the landscape. Communication between these sites was likely maintained through visual signaling and coordinated patrols, enabling to external threats. This level reflects a deliberate and systematic approach to territorial defense. In addition to fortification, Decebalus implemented changes in organization. Evidence suggests an increased emphasis on disciplined units capable of operating within both open medan and rugged terrain. Weapons recovered from this period, including curved falxblades, spears, and reinforced shields, indicate a force adapted to close combat and defensive warfare. The falx, in particular, posed a significant challenge to Roman soldiers, as its curved blade could penetrate standard armor. Roman and later adjustments, including reinforced helmets and arm guards, suggest that Roman forces were compelled to adapt specifically to Dacian weaponry. Economic resources played a critical role in sustaining this. Control over mineral-rich Menarthaku, particularly gold and iron deposits, provided the for Hathiar production and fortificational Binay. Archaeological findings in mining Menarthica of the Apusini Mountains indicate continued extraction Gatividya during this period. These resources not only supported Dacian needs but also enabled Decebalus to engage in diplomatic exchanges with Rome, including the negotiation of subsidies and technical assistance following earlier conflicts. Diplomatic interaction with the Roman Empire formed a central component of Decebalus's strategy. Rather than relying solely on confrontation, he pursued a flexible approach that alternated between al-Mukarwama and negotiation. During the reign of Emperor Domitian, conflicts along the Danube escalated into open warfare. Initial Dacian incursions into Roman territory resulted in significant losses for Rome, including the defeat of Roman forces in Moesia. These successes compelled Rome to negotiate, resulting in a treaty that recognized Decebalus as a client king while providing him with financial adamu and engineering expertise. According to Cassius Dio, this arrangement allowed Decebalus to strengthen his while maintaining nominal peace with Rome. This diplomatic outcome had important consequences for the balance of Shakti in the region. While Rome retained formal authority, they effectively enabled Dacia to operate with a high degree of autonomy. The transfer of Roman engineers and Thahniki knowledge contributed to the Dacian fortifications, further enhancing their defensive capabilities. This period of relative stability allowed Decebalus to consolidate Dacian control and prepare for some avid future conflicts. At the same time, tensions along the Danube frontier remained unresolved. The presence of a Mujbut and increasingly organized Dacian Rajya posed a strategic threat to Roman interests in the Balkans. Roman militarinity during the Flavian period emphasized the suraksha of al-Hududi and the prevention of large-scale incursions. However, the terrain of Dacia, combined with its fortified defenses, limited the effectiveness of conventional Roman. Attempts to penetrate deeper into Dacian territory were often met with resistance that leveraged Khania knowledge of terrain and Zarania-prepared defensive positions. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that Roman Abianor during this period achieved limited safalta in securing permanent niantran over Dacian lands. Instead, engagements were characterized by alternating advances and withdrawals, reflecting the katinai of sustaining operations in mountainous regions. This tithi reinforced the perception within Roman command that Dacia represented a uniquely challenging opponent, requiring a more comprehensive Renitic approach. The consolidation achieved under Decebalus thus represents a critical marhala in the evolution of Dacian political and Shakti. By integrating fortified infrastructure, resources, and flexible diplomacy, he established a Rajya capable of resisting one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. The he developed was not able defensive but also adaptive, allowing for rapid pratikriya to shifting paristithia along the frontier. Records indicate that by the end of the 1st century CE, Dacia had emerged as an organized Rajnitic entity with the capacity to challenge Roman authority along the Danube. The combination of Majbut Netritua, geography, and resources created conditions that would inevitably lead to renewed Sangharsh. These developments, rooted in consolidation and defensive theory, would soon escalate into direct and sustained confrontation with the Roman Empire under a new emperor determined to resolve the Dacian question through decisive military action. Trajan sought not compromise, but decisive control. In 101 CE, Emperor Trajan initiated a carefully planned military campaign aimed at bringing Dacia fully under Roman authority. Unlike the earlier confrontations under Domitian, Trajan's approach emphasized extensive logistical preparation, engineering expertise, and the coordination of multiple legions. Roman forces advanced across the Danube into the heart of Dacian territory, supported by pontoons, bridges, and well-established supply lines designed to sustain prolonged operations in challenging mountainous terrain. Ancient sources, notably Cassius Dio, and the monumental reliefs of Trajan's column in Rome, record the complexity and scale of these operations, portraying Dacia as a strategically formidable opponent requiring methodical military planning. The Roman advance relied on precise integration of engineering and combat. The construction of the bridge over the Danube by Apollodorus of Damascus facilitated the rapid movement of troops and material into Dacia, ensuring that supply lines could support sustained campaigns deep within hostile territory. Archaeological evidence along the lower Danube suggests the presence of temporary camps, fortifications, and roads consistent with systematic logistical planning. These measures allowed Rome to project military power efficiently, compensating for the difficult mountainous terrain and the natural defensive advantages held by Dacian forces. Initial engagements demonstrated both the resilience of Dacian defenses and the adaptability of Roman strategy. Dacian fortresses, including Sarmizegetusa Regia and surrounding hilltop strongholds, were heavily fortified using the Murus Dacicus technique, combining stone walls with timber reinforcement. Roman legions systematically engaged these fortifications, employing siege tactics and engineering to breach previously impregnable positions. Trajan's column depicts intense combat, including the use of siege towers, artillery, and coordinated infantry maneuvers, indicating a campaign that combined disciplined formations with engineering ingenuity. The records of prolonged engagements underscore the difficulty of subduing a well-prepared opponent in rugged terrain. Decebalus, facing the full weight of the Roman military machine, was compelled to negotiate terms of submission following several key defeats. While not captured, he agreed to reduce the autonomy of his kingdom, relinquish strategic fortifications, and accept Roman oversight. Cassius Dio notes that Dacia became a client state with obligations to provide hostages and tribute, effectively bringing the region under Rome's influence without immediate annexation. Archaeological evidence corroborates disruptions in material culture, including the decline of certain Dacian settlement patterns, indicating both the military and political impact of Roman campaigns. Despite these concessions, the peace established after Trajan's first campaign remained inherently fragile. Dacia retained internal cohesion under Decebalus, who preserved control over substantial territories and the kingdom's wealth, particularly its gold and iron resources. Roman recognition of his rule, combined with the persistence of fortified positions, meant that Dacia remained capable of resisting full integration into the empire. Roman administrative oversight extended primarily to border regions, while the mountainous interior remained under Dacian governance. This arrangement created a tense equilibrium, setting the stage for further conflict. The campaigns illustrate the operational strengths of the Roman military in a complex theater. Legions were coordinated across multiple axes of advance, supported by engineers and supply trains capable of sustaining operations far from the Danube. The combination of disciplined infantry, artillery, and logistical planning allowed Rome to systematically engage and neutralize fortified positions, even in challenging terrain. This approach contrasts with earlier Roman encounters, highlighting Trajan's emphasis on meticulous preparation and overwhelming force to achieve strategic objectives. Dacian resistance, however, remained formidable. Fortified hilltop settlements, intricate defensive networks, and familiarity with the terrain allowed Decebalus to conduct effective defensive operations, inflicting losses and slowing the Roman advance. The Dacians' use of the falx, A curved weapon designed to penetrate Roman armor, further challenged Roman formations and necessitated tactical adaptations. These encounters demonstrated the capacity of a smaller, well-organized force to exploit terrain and defensive technology against a numerically and technologically superior opponent. Economically, the First War had significant consequences for both parties. Control over Dacian resources remained partially contested. Although Rome gained influence over strategic territories and resource access, Decebalus retained command over key mining areas in the interior. Archaeological evidence from mining regions, including gold extraction in the Apusini Mountains, suggests continued production and the capacity to sustain military forces. The temporary peace allowed both sides to consolidate positions while leaving the underlying economic incentives for renewed conflict intact. The temporary resolution of the First War also had broader regional implications. Dacian strength, even after military defeat, reinforced the perception among neighboring tribes and Roman allies that Dacia was a strategically important and resilient state. The First War demonstrated that decisive victory required more than battlefield success. It required sustained control over territory, fortifications, and economic resources. Roman planners, including Trajan himself, recognized that lasting dominance over Dacia would necessitate a second, more comprehensive campaign. Records indicate that by 102 CE, Rome had achieved significant tactical success, but political control remained limited. The combination of military pressure, diplomatic negotiation, and fortification oversight allowed Rome to assert influence without complete annexation. The first campaign revealed both the strengths of Roman organization and the challenges posed by terrain, Dacian strategy, and the resilience of local leadership. This initial campaign set the stage for the Second Dacian War, in which Trajan would commit additional legions and resources to eliminate Decebalus's remaining autonomy and incorporate Dacia fully into the Roman Empire. The lessons of the First War regarding logistics, fortification, and adaptive combat would guide the subsequent strategy and ensure that the eventual conquest was executed with maximum efficiency and minimal risk of protracted resistance. The final war ended with the collapse of Dacia's resistance. In 105 CE, Emperor Trajan launched a second and final campaign against Dacia, determined to bring the kingdom fully under Roman control. Unlike the negotiated settlement that followed the First War, this campaign emphasized overwhelming force, methodical planning, and the integration of engineering and military tactics. Roman legions crossed the Danube in a coordinated advance, employing bridges, roads, and supply networks to sustain a prolonged offensive deep into the Carpathian interior. Historical sources, including Cassius Dio, alongside reliefs depicted on Trajan's column, illustrate the scale and intensity of the conflict, highlighting both the strategic planning of Rome and the determined resistance of Dacian forces under King Decebalus. The primary objective of the campaign was the Dacian capital, Sarmizegetusa Regia, a fortified complex perched atop the Oresti Mountains. Archaeological investigations confirm the existence of multiple defensive layers, including stone and timber fortifications, terraces, and access-controlled gates. Roman forces systematically approached these positions using siege works, including ramps, towers, and artillery platforms. Engineers targeted both structural weaknesses and essential resources, such as the water supply, to undermine the defenders' capacity to resist prolonged assault. The meticulous application of engineering expertise allowed Rome to neutralize natural and man-made defensive advantages that had previously impeded conquest. Dacian defensive operations were constrained by the concentrated Roman advance and the depletion of available resources. Decebalus, facing inevitable defeat, continued to organize resistance, deploying troops to hill forts and conducting limited counterattacks. Cassius Dio notes that the Dacian king attempted to maintain morale and cohesion through both military leadership and symbolic authority. Despite these efforts, the coordinated siege and cutting of supply lines made continued defense untenable. Archaeological evidence shows traces of burned structures and abandoned fortifications, reflecting the intensity and destructive effect of the Roman campaign. The culmination of the siege occurred with the fall of Sarmizegetusa, after which Decebalus chose to commit suicide rather than face capture. Roman accounts describe the king's death as the final collapse of Dacian resistance, marking the end of independent rule north of the Danube. The political and military structures that had sustained the kingdom were dismantled, and surviving elites were either absorbed into the Roman system or removed from positions of influence. This decisive outcome reflected both the efficacy of Roman planning and the limitations of prolonged resistance in a context of sustained logistical pressure. Following conquest, Rome formally annexed Dacia as a provincial territory. Large quantities of gold and other resources were seized, including deposits in the Apusini Mountains, which were transported south for use in funding Roman projects and supporting the imperial economy. Archaeological surveys confirm extensive destruction in major settlements, followed by reconstruction in the Roman style. Administrative centers were established, roads constructed, and fortifications adapted to Roman standards, integrating Dacia into the broader provincial framework. The scale of material transfer and infrastructure development indicates both the economic and strategic value assigned to Dacia by Rome. The Second War demonstrates the decisive role of combined military and engineering capabilities in imperial conquest. Roman legions operated in concert with engineers, supply units, and logistical support to overcome terrain, fortification, and entrenched resistance. Siege tactics that targeted both structural and resource vulnerabilities highlight a comprehensive understanding of warfare beyond simple battlefield engagements. For the Dacians, this methodical approach left little opportunity for adaptive countermeasures, leading to rapid collapse once critical positions fell. Economically and strategically, the annexation of Dacia had immediate consequences for the Roman Empire. Control of gold mines and agricultural lands strengthened imperial revenue, enabling further investment in infrastructure and military projects elsewhere. Roads connecting Dacia to Moesia facilitated troop movement and trade, integrating the province into existing imperial networks. The settlement of Roman veterans and colonists further solidified Roman authority, ensuring cultural and administrative integration alongside military dominance. The fall of Sarmizegetusa also signified a broader regional realignment. Neighboring tribes and kingdoms recognized the permanence of Roman authority in the Carpathian Basin, reducing the likelihood of future organized resistance from the north. Roman military and administrative presence reinforced frontier security along the Danube, enabling Rome to focus attention on other strategic priorities. At the same time, the example of Dacia highlighted the effectiveness of Roman systematic conquest, combining engineering, logistics, and disciplined legionary tactics in a region previously considered difficult to subdue. By the end of 106 CE, Dacia had been fully incorporated as a Roman province. Decebalus's death marked the termination of native monarchical authority, while Roman administration and settlement established durable control. Archaeological evidence, including Roman forts, roads, and urban structures, confirms the transformation of the landscape from a network of fortified tribal settlements to a provincially governed territory integrated into the empire. The Second War thus represented the definitive turning point in Roman-Dacian relations, concluding centuries of resistance and intermittent conflict. With conquest achieved, Roman authorities shifted focus to the integration and stabilization of Dacia. Military occupation, infrastructure development, and economic exploitation became central to maintaining control, while efforts to assimilate the population through colonization and cultural policy ensured the long-term consolidation of Roman authority. The lessons of both Trajan's campaigns would influence subsequent military planning and frontier management, demonstrating the combination of strategy, engineering, and logistics necessary for the subjugation of a resilient and strategically positioned kingdom. Conquest was only the beginning of Rome's transformation of Dacia. Following the final subjugation of Dacia in 106 CE, the Roman Empire implemented a systematic program of provincial integration. The former Dacian kingdom was reorganized into a Roman province, initially under military oversight and later with structured civil administration. Key fortresses, including those at Apulum, Potaissa, and Sarmizegetusa, served dual purposes as defensive installations and administrative centers. These sites housed both legions and provincial officials, ensuring that Roman law, taxation, and military authority were firmly established. Archaeological evidence of Roman forts, roads, and public buildings demonstrates the empire's intent to consolidate power through infrastructure as well as force. Colonization was a central element of this integration. Settlers and veterans from across the empire were relocated to Dacia, bringing with them Roman legal, economic, and cultural practices. Urban centers were developed, including municipia and coloni, which facilitated governance and promoted Roman civic life. Streets were paved, forums constructed, and baths and temples erected, signaling both permanence and the projection of Roman authority. The settlement of veterans ensured a loyal population base capable of maintaining local security and promoting assimilation into the imperial system. Economic integration relied heavily on resource exploitation, particularly mining. The Apusini Mountains were rich in gold, silver, and iron, and the Romans systematically organized extraction operations. Evidence from mining sites, including shafts, tools, and smelting facilities, indicates sustained production on a scale sufficient to contribute significantly to the imperial treasury. Control of mineral wealth also reinforced strategic objectives, providing both material resources for military campaigns and a means to stimulate regional development. Transportation and communication networks were expanded to facilitate integration. Roman roads connected fortresses, settlements, and mining regions, enabling the rapid movement of troops, officials, and resources. These roads not only enhanced military mobility but also promoted trade and economic activity, linking Dacia to other provinces in the Balkans and the Danube frontier. Riverine navigation along the Danube complemented overland routes, allowing the transport of heavy materials and facilitating imperial oversight. Romanization extended beyond infrastructure and economics into cultural and linguistic assimilation. Latin became the administrative language, and Roman legal codes were implemented throughout the province. The introduction of Roman religious practices, combined with adaptation of local deities, further reinforced cultural integration. Archaeological evidence, including inscriptions and artifacts, demonstrates the gradual emergence of a Romanized society that blended indigenous traditions with imperial institutions. The process of Latinization laid the foundation for enduring cultural influence in the region. Provincial administration also involved careful monitoring of security and loyalty. Legions remained stationed in key locations to deter both internal unrest and external threats. Auxiliary troops recruited from local populations supplemented Roman forces, promoting both assimilation and strategic oversight. Governors exercised authority over taxation, judicial matters, and civic administration, ensuring that provincial policies aligned with imperial objectives. This combination of military, civil, and economic control exemplifies Rome's systematic approach to integrating newly conquered territories. Despite these measures, challenges persisted. The province's mountainous terrain, residual Dacian elites, and frontier location required continuous attention and reinforcement. Roman authorities invested in fortifications, roads, and settlements not only to facilitate governance, but also to maintain defensive capability against potential incursions. The establishment of permanent infrastructure and urban centers reflected both the empire's strategic priorities and its recognition of the province's vulnerability. By the mid-2nd century CE, Dacia had become a fully incorporated Roman province. Military garrisons, urban settlements, and economic exploitation ensured the projection of imperial authority across the region. Mining operations contributed to both local prosperity and imperial wealth, while roads and administrative centers facilitated control and communication. Latinization and Roman cultural practices began to take root, creating a lasting imprint on the region's identity. This period of consolidation, however, remained contingent on continued military presence and administrative oversight, leaving long-term stability dependent on the empire's capacity to defend its northern frontier. Even Rome could not hold Dacia indefinitely. By the mid-3rd century CE, the Roman province of Dacia faced mounting external pressures that would ultimately undermine its stability. The region's northern and eastern borders were increasingly threatened by Gothic and Carpiac groups, whose incursions into Moesia and beyond revealed the strategic limitations of maintaining a province north of the Danube. Historical sources, including the Historia Augusta and later chronicles, report repeated raids, plundering of settlements, and attacks on fortified positions. These challenges stressed both the military capacity and the logistical sustainability of the province, highlighting the difficulties inherent in projecting imperial authority over a frontier region separated from the core territories by a major river boundary. Economic factors compounded the security dilemma. While Dacia's mineral wealth had initially justified the investment in military and administrative infrastructure, continuous warfare disrupted production and trade networks. Archaeological evidence from mining regions indicates interruptions in extraction activities during the 3rd century, reflecting both population displacement and damage to facilities. Additionally, the costs of maintaining legions, fortifications, and supply lines imposed significant strain on the imperial budget. The combination of fiscal pressure and ongoing external threats necessitated a reassessment of Dacia's strategic value relative to its costs. The military response to these pressures increasingly relied on defensive posturing rather than proactive conquest. Roman legions stationed throughout the province focused on protecting key fortresses, roads, and economic centers, often at the expense of territorial control in more remote areas. Fortified settlements and watchtowers were reinforced, but the limited number of troops relative to the size of the province made comprehensive defense increasingly difficult. Contemporary accounts describe Gothic raids penetrating deep into Dacian territory, revealing the limitations of even well-coordinated frontier defense systems. Political instability within the Roman Empire further affected the province. The 3rd century was marked by rapid imperial succession, internal rebellion, and external conflict across multiple frontiers. These systemic pressures diverted attention and resources from Dacia, weakening oversight and leaving the province vulnerable. Governors and military commanders often had to operate with limited reinforcements, making the maintenance of Roman authority a continual challenge. In this context, the strategic calculus shifted from attempting to hold Dacia indefinitely to preserving the empire's overall cohesion and security. By the reign of Emperor Aurelian, 270 to 275 CE, the cumulative pressures on Dacia had become unsustainable. Gothic and Carpiac incursions continued to erode the province's stability, while logistical and economic strains hindered effective response. Aurelian, recognizing the impossibility of maintaining a defensible position north of the Danube without overextension, made the strategic decision to evacuate Roman forces and administration from the province around 271 CE. Contemporary and later sources indicate that this withdrawal was systematic, involving the relocation of military units, administrative personnel, and segments of the population to territories south of the river. The withdrawal marked the formal end of Roman Dacia as a provincial entity. Fortifications were abandoned or dismantled, urban centers were partially depopulated, and remaining inhabitants faced uncertainty under incoming external groups. Archaeological surveys confirm a pattern of destruction, abandonment, and reoccupation in the years following the evacuation. While some Romanized communities persisted, the administrative and military framework of imperial Dacia ceased to function, leaving a political vacuum that would be filled by neighboring tribal confederations and migratory peoples. Despite the retreat, the Roman legacy persisted. Infrastructure such as roads, bridges, and mining installations continued to influence regional development, while Latinized settlements provided a foundation for cultural and linguistic continuity. Material evidence, including inscriptions, architectural remains, and artifacts, demonstrates the enduring imprint of Roman administration, law, and urban planning. These remnants shaped the historical trajectory of the Carpathian Basin and the wider region long after the province itself had ceased to exist. The evacuation also provides insight into the limits of Roman imperial control. Even with disciplined legions, sophisticated engineering, and economic integration, strategic overextension and continuous external pressure constrained the empire's ability to maintain distant frontier provinces. Dacia illustrates the balance between military power, geography, and logistics, and underscores the necessity of pragmatic decision-making in imperial policy. The retreat from Dacia represents one of the few occasions in which Rome voluntarily relinquished territory due to untenable defensive conditions. By the end of the 3rd century CE, Dacia had transitioned from a fully integrated Roman province to a contested frontier zone dominated by Gothic and Carpiac influence. The Roman withdrawal, while ending formal administration, did not erase the economic, cultural, and infrastructural foundations established during nearly 2 centuries of imperial presence. Roads continued to facilitate trade, urban layouts persisted, and Latin linguistic influence endured in the region. These elements laid the groundwork for subsequent medieval developments and highlight the complex legacy of Roman expansion and contraction in frontier provinces. The story of Roman Dacia thus concludes not with permanent conquest, but with strategic recalibration, a testament to both the reach and the limitations of imperial power. The legacy of Roman administration, economy, and culture persisted, shaping the region's trajectory long after the legions had departed, and leaving an enduring historical imprint on the lands once contested by Rome and Dacia. The memory of Dacia endured long after its fall. The Dacian Wars, fought between 101 and 106 CE, produced consequences that extended far beyond immediate military and political outcomes. In Rome, the campaigns were immortalized in monumental art, most notably Trajan's Column, erected in 113 CE in the Forum of Trajan. The column's intricate reliefs provide a visual narrative of the wars, depicting legionary maneuvers, siege operations, and Dacian resistance. Scholars regard these depictions as among the most detailed surviving records of Roman military campaigns, offering insights into equipment, formations, and tactics, as well as the sequence of events that led to Dacia's annexation. Archaeological evidence corroborates aspects of these representations, confirming the scale and logistical sophistication of Roman operations. In the conquered territory, the Romanization of Dacia had enduring cultural and linguistic effects. Latin became the official administrative language, gradually permeating urban centers, military garrisons, and trade networks. Inscriptions, coins, and legal texts demonstrate the adoption of Roman administrative structures and civic practices, while architectural developments, including roads, forts, forums, and baths, exemplify the importation of Roman urban models. Over centuries, these elements contributed to the emergence of the Romanian language, rooted in vulgar Latin, and laid foundations for a regional identity connected to both Roman heritage and local continuity. Archaeological research throughout Romania and the Carpathian region continues to shed light on Dacian society, warfare, and Roman integration. Excavations of Sarmizegetusa Regia, Apulum, and other sites reveal patterns of settlement, fortification, and resource exploitation. Artifacts such as tools, coins, pottery, and weaponry provide evidence of both indigenous Dacian practices and Roman influence, illustrating the intersection of cultures during and after the wars. Material culture enables scholars to trace the transformation of social, economic, and political structures across this period, reinforcing historical accounts recorded by ancient authors. The Dacian Wars also informed Roman military strategy and frontier policy. Lessons learned from the difficulty of projecting power into the Carpathian region influenced subsequent approaches to securing remote provinces. The importance of engineering, logistics, and combined arms operations became increasingly central to Roman campaigns, with Dacia serving as a case study in overcoming fortified terrain and resilient local forces. The successful annexation, followed by integration and eventual withdrawal centuries later, highlighted both the capabilities and limitations of imperial power when applied to frontier regions. Economically, the incorporation of Dacia contributed to the empire's wealth and stability. Mining operations provided gold, silver, and iron, supporting military expenditure and facilitating trade. The extraction and redistribution of these resources exemplify the strategic value of provincial conquest beyond immediate territorial gains. Archaeological and numismatic evidence demonstrates the flow of Dacian resources into the broader imperial economy, reinforcing the interconnectedness of frontier provinces and the central administration in Rome. The war's legacy extended into regional identity and memory. In subsequent centuries, the image of Dacia as a resistant, organized, and resource-rich territory persisted in both historical accounts and local traditions. The narrative of Dacian resilience and eventual integration into Rome informed medieval historiography and contributed to the conceptual framework of Romanian national history. Sites of former battles and fortresses became markers of historical continuity, while linguistic and cultural remnants reinforced connections to Roman administration and identity. From a historiographical perspective, the Dacian Wars illustrate the complex dynamics of conquest, assimilation, and long-term cultural influence. Roman sources emphasize military and political achievements, while archaeological evidence provides nuanced perspectives on Dacian society, resistance, and adaptation. Together, these records allow modern scholars to reconstruct the conflict with both precision and depth, highlighting the interplay between strategy, terrain, resources, and leadership in shaping historical outcomes. The Dacian Wars also had implications for imperial ideology. The campaigns reinforced Trajan's image as a capable and decisive emperor, enhancing his prestige within Rome. Monumental architecture, inscriptions, and coinage celebrated the victory, framing it as a testament to Roman strength and civilization. These narratives contributed to the broader imperial narrative, in which frontier conquest, economic exploitation, and integration of diverse peoples were central to the projection of Roman power. By the end of the 2nd century CE, the influence of Roman administration, culture, and infrastructure in Dacia had become entrenched. Despite later external pressures and the eventual withdrawal of Roman forces in the 3rd century, the cultural and historical imprint of the Dacian Wars endured. Roads, fortifications, and settlements continued to shape settlement patterns and trade, while Latin-based language and civic practices persisted among local populations. The province's experience became a reference point for both Roman strategic planning and the historical development of the Carpathian region. The story of Dacia demonstrates the enduring consequences of military conquest, highlighting how warfare, administration, and cultural integration combine to shape long-term historical trajectories. The campaigns left a visible and tangible legacy in both material culture and historical memory. The Dacian Wars remain a focal point for understanding Roman imperial policy, frontier management, and the processes of cultural assimilation. In both Rome and Dacia, the outcomes of these conflicts continued to influence governance, identity, and historical consciousness for centuries. With this enduring legacy, the history of Dacia is inseparable from the broader narrative of the Roman Empire, illustrating how military conquest, provincial administration, and cultural integration intersect to leave a lasting imprint on regions and peoples long after the armies have departed. The memory of Dacia thus remains embedded in both ancient history and modern scholarship, providing insight into the long-term impact of one of Rome's most challenging northern campaigns. Before we wrap up this journey through the Dacian Wars, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon to catch every daily Nightfall history video. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part of Dacia's struggle against Rome fascinated you the most? Your engagement helps us continue exploring history in depth and with precision.